Hi, my name is Nicole Tallman, and I'm the Poetry Ambassador for Miami-Dade County Mayor Daniela Levine Cava, and I am also a poet. And it is a real pleasure to spend a little bit of time with you today talking about poetry and music, two things that I'm very passionate about, and in particular, the intersection between those two things. I want to encourage everyone who is interested in poetry and music to take part in this year's Piano Slam, which is the 15th year of this amazing event. And we have a really, really cool theme this year: hot music, hot Miami. What more can you ask for? So I'm hoping that the pieces that I read to you today may inspire your creation as well. And a little bit more about me. I have been in South Florida for almost 17 years now. I moved here from Michigan quite a few years ago. And I like to write a lot about seasons in particular and the weather. I think that this challenge in particular this year is interesting, especially to me, because I am a poet who has written quite a lot about grief poetry in particular, and specifically the idea of what it is to move from somewhere that has four seasons and now to live somewhere where there's really only one summer here in Miami. So I'm very much interested in the theme of this year's Piano Slam. And I've written two villanelles for you, and I'm going to be reading them to you. And for those of you who aren't familiar with a villanelle, it is a form from 16th century Italy. And it is a form that has been embraced fairly recently by slam poets and other poets in particular because it does lend itself so well to performance, and because of the musicality of it. It actually has its roots in dance and music. So it is a beautiful form, and I think quite appropriate for this particular competition. I will also say that I don't tend to write very many poems in format. And when I was asked to write a poem for this particular event, I thought long and hard about what form would lend itself most well to the idea of musicality. A lot of the forms that I write in are free form, meaning there isn't necessarily a specific rhyme scheme or syllable count. I really like free verse, but I really wanted to challenge myself and push myself beyond the boundaries of what I normally do, because it's a very special project and I wanted to honor it, especially after I heard the beautiful musical composition that was written for this. So I also want to thank the musicians out there in the crowd as well for taking on this task. I decided to combine both music and trees into the pieces that I have composed for you. And I'm going to read. Actually, before I read, I do want to say to those of you that are interested in villanelles, there's this beautiful little book here. It's very small. It's called Villanelles, and it was edited by Annie Finch and Marie Elizabeth Malley. It's a beautiful little book, and it gives you a really good history of what a villanelle is. And it also gives you a lot of different examples in case you're interested in tackling a villanelle yourself if you haven't written one. It's essentially a 19-line poem, and it has a pattern of repeated lines and two really principal rhyme schemes. So when you're writing a villanelle, if you're doing it in the traditional sense of a villanelle, the most important lines for you are going to be the first and the third lines of the first stanza of your poem. So you have a 19-line poem and you have five stanzas that are A, B, A rhyme scheme. And then your final stanza is A, B, A, A. So when you're putting together your villanelle, you really want to focus on what you make your first line and what you make your third line of your first stanza, because those two lines are going to repeat throughout the poem. And you're going to need to make rhymes based on the last words of those two lines. So I'm going to read to you a very traditional villanelle. And this is actually the first very traditional villanelle I've ever written. So I'm being very vulnerable with you right now, but I'm going to read it for you. And I wrote it specifically for you. And this is called The Music of the Trees. Do you hear the music of the trees? The wind that stirs the leaves to speak. Turn to the trees for songs and ease. The palms provide a tide of breeze. In summer's swelter, their shade we seek. Do you hear the music of the trees? The pines will shelter from the freeze as winter's whiplash chills the cheek. Turn to the trees for songs and ease. The loneliest of hearts it frees, our Cythereum when wings are weak. Do you hear the music of the trees? The rooted system's serpents seize, the troubled tears from our bluest shriek. Turn to the trees for songs, turn to the trees for songs and ease. The honeyed buzz from a nest of bees, the mockingbird perched at the peak. Do you hear the music of the trees? Turn to the trees for songs and ease. So I think as I was reading that, you heard the very strong rhyme scheme, the word trees, and rhyming that with breeze, freeze, seas, and bees. And then also the rhyming of ease with ease, and then the repetition of that. So I think the very last stanza of that poem, the honeyed buzz from a nest of bees, the mockingbird perched at the peak. Do you hear the music of the trees? Turn to the trees for songs and ease. Really, really captures the rhyme scheme in this poem. And I'm going to read it for you one more time so you can hear it again. Okay, the music of the trees. Do you hear the music of the trees, the wind that stirs the leaves to speak? Turn to the trees for songs and ease. The palms provide a tide of breeze. In summer swelter, their shade we seek. Do you hear the music of the trees? The pines will shelter from the freeze as winter's whiplash chills the cheek. Turn to the trees for songs and ease. The loneliest of hearts it frees, our Cythereum when wings are weak. Do you hear the music of the trees? The rooted system's serpent sees, the troubled tears from our bluest shriek. Turn to the trees for songs and ease. The honeyed buzz from a nest of bees, the mockingbird perched at the peak. Do you hear the music of the trees? Turn to the trees for songs and ease. And while we're on the topic of music, one of my favorite musicians is Tori Amos, who happens to be a pianist and very classically trained, but she's taken a lot of what she's learned classically and turned it on its head. And as I was thinking of poems for you and also of the theme, because I'm from a place where there is a very, very brutal winter, I wanted to balance out the poem talking about the summer, and also it does have some hints to winter, but it really pays homage to a warm climate. I wanted to balance that out with a poem that touches on what it is to live in the cold. And there's a song by Tori Amos called Cloud on My Tongue. And it starts out with, all the girls here are freezing cold. And so I decided to write a villanelle for Cloud on My Tongue, inspired by Tori Amos and borrowing the line, all the girls here are freezing cold, from her song, which I love and think is a beautiful musical and lyrical composition. But also to turn the villanelle on its head a little bit, because one thing that I would encourage you to do when you're writing is break the rules if you want to. We do have these rules in place, but rules can be broken, especially in poetry, without necessarily a whole lot of consequences. So for my second villanelle, I decided to shake things up a little bit. It is still 19 lines, and it still has the six stanzas, and it still maintains the ABA rhyme scheme in those first five, with the sixth having the AABB rhyme scheme. I'm sorry, ABAA rhyme scheme, but it plays a little bit with the repetition factor. So I want to read that to you so that you can hear the difference between a very traditional villanelle and one that is slightly modified. So this is Cloud on My Tongue, and this is for Tori Amos. All the girls here are freezing cold, stripped of their most bewitching powers. They shiver like swans in March's hold. Another empty day in this empty city of gold. No one waters the winter flowers. All the girls here are freezing cold. All the girls here are 100 years old, now masters of the touchless hours. They quiver like swans in March's hold. The jealous frost rains down, a raging white cold, blasting the wrath of the cooling towers. All the girls here have seized the cold. All the lady petals refuse to fold. A strong flower never long cowers. It blooms bigger in March's fiercest hold. All the winter roses have grown so bold. A self-watered flower never sours. All the girls here have seized the cold. They shimmer like swans in March's hold. So you'll hear the repeating rhyme scheme as you did with the first villanelle that I wrote, and a little bit of liberties that I've taken with the refrain line. So again, that first refrain, all the girls here are freezing cold. And then the second refrain, they shiver like swans in March's hold. So through the development of that poem, you see that we switch a little bit here from all the girls here are freezing cold to all the girls here are 100 years old. All the girls here have seized the cold. All the girls here have seized the cold, and the development of the swan. So they first shiver like swans in March's hold, and then they quiver like swans in March's hold. Then they bloom bigger in March's fiercest hold, and then they shimmer like swans in March's hold. So I encourage you also to take liberties with the form if you decide that you want to write a villanelle. And also, one thing that I will say is traditional villanelles do tend to lend themselves to iambic pentameter, those 14 lines of, or I'm sorry, these 10 syllable lines. But I decided not to necessarily honor that 10 syllable rhyme scheme. I've seen villanelles that they can run anywhere from, gosh, many fewer lines to, I've seen some that run up to 14 syllables per line, but 10 seems to be the syllable count at which people normally take a breath, which is why I think that a lot of people tend to write in that line, in that rhyme scheme. And holding themselves to the syllables. So with the first villanelle that I read for you, I actually maintained a mostly 9 to 8 syllable per line count. In fact, as I'm looking at it, every line in the first one, The Music of the Trees, actually is 9 or 8. But I mixed things up quite a bit with Cloud on My Tongue, and I wanted to have that sort of dissonance and that departure from the traditional sense, which is why I push the boundaries a little bit more with Cloud on My Tongue. And for those of you who are interested in pushing the boundaries even more, I really strongly encourage you to read this book on villanelles, because you will see a very big departure from the traditional standpoint, and people playing with the stanzas and the way that they appear, the refrains, the lines, and the repetition. So I know I've talked to you quite a bit about villanelles, and I encourage you to find your music wherever you hear it and see it. You don't have to stick to any particular form to find musicality. You don't have to stick to any particular rhyme scheme or meter. Just hearing the music yourself internally and then turning that into whatever feels right to you is just as valid of a form of a poem or a non-form of a poem. So really what it's about is honoring yourself and your spirit and your connection to the theme, and really finding yourself throughout your work and lending yourself to the expression. So I hope what I've said has been helpful to you. If you have any questions, or if you want to share any thoughts with me, you can always feel free to send me an email. My email is tallman@miamidade.gov. That's my official email account with the county, and as poetry ambassador for the mayor. So I'm always happy to hear from you. You can send me maybe any villanelles or poems that you've written if you want me to take a look at your work, just so that I can see it. I always love to do that, and just to see other poets' work as well. So thank you so much again for listening and for spending this time. And I wish you all the best as you write your poems for this competition. Thank you so much, and have an amazing day.